There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to mothers. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of rest, but the silence of a woman who has watched everything she built get slowly, casually dismantled, and has chosen, for reasons too deep to explain quickly, not to say a word about it yet. Eleanor Whitmore had been living inside that silence for nearly 2 years. She was 70 years old, 5'4", with silver hair she kept pinned back at the nape of her neck and hands that had kneaded bread dough, held newborn grandchildren, signed real estate contracts, and planted 300 tulip bulbs in a single October afternoon without asking anyone for help. She had brown eyes that had laughed so much over the course of her life that the lines around them were almost architectural, built by joy, deepened by loss, ways set permanently into a face that people looked at and immediately trusted. She dressed well, not expensively, not in the way her daughter-in-law would have defined it, but well. Pressed slacks, a cream blouse, a thin gold watch Harold had given her on their 25th anniversary. She wore the watch every day, not to be seen, simply because she liked having something of his close to her wrist, ticking steady, reminding her that time had always moved forward, even when she did not want it to. Harold had been gone 14 months. 14 months, and in that time Eleanor had discovered things about grief that no one had warned her about. She had expected the loneliness. She had not expected how invisible grief would make her, not to herself, but to the people around her. How quickly a widow becomes a category. How fast the sympathetic phone calls thinned into obligatory check-ins. How the word mom in her son's voice shifted almost imperceptibly from warmth into something that sounded more like a box being checked. She had noticed all of it. She had said nothing. That was the particular gift and the particular danger of Eleanor Whitmore. She noticed everything, and she had spent a lifetime deciding what was worth saying and what was worth keeping. On the morning of the last Thanksgiving she would ever spend being small, Eleanor woke at 5:30, the way she had every Thanksgiving for 41 years. The ritual had begun before Thomas was born. It was the thing she and Harold had built together in the first year of their marriage. When they had a one-bedroom apartment with a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to stand in, and neither of them had family in the city, and they had decided that if they were going to build a life, they were going to build it around a table that mattered. They had made pecan pie that first year from a recipe Harold's mother had handwritten on an index card. They had burned the first one. They had eaten the second one standing over the counter at midnight, laughing, because they had miscalculated the time, and Thanksgiving dinner had become technically a Friday breakfast. Harold had called it the best pie he had ever eaten, and Eleanor had known he was lying, and had loved him desperately for it. After that, Thanksgiving was hers to run. Not because Harold made it that way, because she made it that way. She was the one who thought about the centerpiece in September, who ordered the good butter from the farm stand by mid-October, who made 2 kinds of stuffing, one with sausage and sage because that was what Harold wanted, one with dried cranberries and chestnuts because that was what she wanted, and she saw no reason why a table large enough for both should choose. She made the pies on Wednesday evening. She was in the kitchen by 6 on Thursday morning. She had the stock simmering by 7, the table set by 9, the house smelling like everything that was supposed to mean family before the first guest arrived. Thomas had grown up believing this was simply what Thanksgiving was, what kitchens were for, what mothers did. He had not, apparently, understood that it was what his mother had decided, had chosen, what had designed, and that it belonged to her as surely as her watch and her wedding ring and the 41 years she had poured into making his life feel like it had a center. Brianna had been dismantling it one Thanksgiving at a time. The first year after the wedding, it was small. She arrived at Eleanor's house for Thanksgiving with her mother and her 2 sisters, and a store-bought cranberry sauce that she placed prominently on the table without asking, and which Eleanor had quietly moved to the far end near the breadbasket and said nothing about. That was the year Brianna had mentioned, in a bright, offhand way, that she found pecan pie a little heavy, personally. Eleanor had smiled and served her a slice of the apple tart she always made as a secondary dessert for the people who didn't want pecan, and watched Brianna eat half of it without acknowledging it, and thought, "So that's the kind of woman you are?" The second Thanksgiving, Brianna rearranged the table seating after Eleanor had already set it. Harold had still been alive then, and he had looked at Eleanor across the changed table with an expression that was half apology and half exhaustion, and Eleanor had thought of the index card recipe and the burned pie and the midnight kitchen and had chosen the grace of saying nothing. The third Thanksgiving, Brianna announced she was hosting. "It makes more sense," she said. "We have more space now." Which was true. Thomas and Brianna had bought a beautiful four-bedroom colonial 2 towns over, in with an open-plan kitchen that flowed into a dining room that seated 14. Harold and Eleanor had helped them buy it. The down payment had come from a check Eleanor had written, from an account Brianna had never asked about, and Thomas had never thought to question. $80,000, gift-wrapped in a conversation about family helping family, and deposited without ceremony into an escrow account that turned a stretch to purchase into something comfortable. Brianna had not said thank you. Not in the way Eleanor meant when she thought of thank you. She had texted a picture of the signed closing documents with 3 champagne glasses and said, "We did it." And Eleanor had set her phone face down on Harold's desk and gone to tend the garden. After that, Thanksgiving moved to Brianna's house permanently, and every year, where Eleanor still came early. It was, perhaps, the last thread of her tradition that she held onto without being asked to let go. She came the morning of. She brought her pie shells and her filling and her stuffing ingredients. She settled into the kitchen the way a musician settles into a familiar instrument, and she made what she had always made. For 3 years, Brianna tolerated this with the studied patience of a woman who considered herself generous. In year 4, she stopped tolerating it. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Margaret Reed. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. Eleanor arrived at Thomas and Brianna's house at 7:15 on Thanksgiving morning. She had her canvas bag with the pie crusts she had pre-made Wednesday night, her small cooler with the filling ingredients, her bundle of fresh sage and thyme from the pot on her back porch that she brought to every Thanksgiving because Brianna's kitchen garden was purely decorative. She had her good apron, cream with thin blue stripes, the one Harold had bought her at a kitchen shop in Vermont on a trip they had taken for their 30th anniversary. She used her key. Thomas had given her a key when they moved in, and she had never once used it except when invited. This was an invitation. This was Thanksgiving. She had been coming early for 41 years. See, the house was already alive. That was the first thing she noticed, and the thing she registered quietly in the way she registered most things, not with alarm, but with a careful internal note, like a woman adding a line to a ledger she had been keeping for a long time. There were cars in the driveway, 2 of them, Brianna's white SUV and a silver sedan Eleanor recognized as belonging to Brianna's sister, Courtney. The kitchen lights were blazing and there was music playing, something with a heavy bass line that seemed aggressively out of place at 7 in the morning on a holiday. Eleanor set down her bag at the door, hung her coat, and walked toward the kitchen. There were 4 women in it. Brianna, in a catering apron, not a home-cooking apron, the kind Eleanor wore. Wait, but a professional-grade catering apron with the logo of Brianna's company, Harvest Table Events, printed across the chest. Courtney, leaning against the island, eating a store-bought pastry. Brianna's other sister, Dana, scrolling her phone at the kitchen table. And Brianna's mother, Linda, who had the good grace to look mildly startled when Eleanor appeared in the doorway, and the insufficient grace to say anything about it. The counters were covered, not with the good disorder of holiday cooking, with the very specific covered counter look of a professional kitchen in setup mode. There were clear plastic containers with pre-labeled contents. There were printed worksheets with timing grids. There were stacked hotel pans and a portable warming unit plugged into the outlet near the window that had always been where Eleanor plugged in the standing mixer. Brianna was on her phone, speaking in a low, efficient voice, apparently coordinating a delivery. She glanced up when Eleanor entered, not with surprise, with something closer to assessment. She finished her call. Eleanor, not Mom. That had changed 6 months ago without announcement. You're early. I always come early, Eleanor said. She set her bag on the small side counter by the door. Not the main counter, not wanting to be in the way before she understood what she was walking into. I brought the pies and the stuffing, same as always. There was a pause. Brianna looked at Courtney. Something passed between them that Eleanor was not supposed to catch, and that Eleanor caught entirely. About that, Brianna said, pulling her apron strings tighter with the particular decisiveness of a woman who has prepared this conversation in advance. I actually went ahead and arranged catering this year. Eleanor waited. Harvest Table is handling the full menu. Everything is coming in. It's going to be beautiful, very professional. I thought it would be easier for everyone, including you, not to spend the whole day in a kitchen. She smiled when she said, including you. It was the smile of someone offering what she has already decided is a gift that should be accepted gratefully. I see, Eleanor said. The pies are a sweet thought. You could leave them for dessert if you want. A sweet thought. Eleanor noted this, filed it, so said nothing. She set her cooler next to her bag and opened it and took out her pie fillings and her crimped shells and placed them on the small side counter quietly and methodically, the way she had placed things on counters in kitchens for half a century. She was not defiant about it. She was not theatrical. She was simply continuing to do the thing she had always done, in the home of her son, on the holiday she had held like a torch for 41 years. Brianna watched her for a moment. Then she turned back to her preparations. For 20 minutes, the kitchen held an uneasy civility. Eleanor worked in her corner. Brianna's team worked on the island. Courtney and Dana watched and offered occasional commentary that managed to be both idle and performative at the same time. Linda stayed quiet and looked once or twice, now at Eleanor with an expression Eleanor read precisely. I see what's happening here, and I cannot bring myself to say anything about it. Eleanor understood that expression. She had worn it herself in the early years, when she had watched Harold make decisions she didn't agree with, and had swallowed her objection for the sake of a peace she valued. She understood the cowardice in it. She did not think less of Linda for it. She had simply stopped expecting anything from it. The catering delivery arrived at 8:45. 3 large warming bags, 2 hotel pan carriers, a box of disposable serving trays. 2 young men in matching Harvest Table polo shirts brought it through the back door, and Brianna directed them efficiently, and Eleanor pressed herself gently to the side of the kitchen to stay out of the flow. That was when Thomas appeared. He came downstairs in the way he had been coming downstairs for the past 2 years, not with the open ease of a man in his own home, but with a slightly managed expression, the look of someone who has pre-calculated the emotional temperature of a room before entering it. He had his father's build and his mother's coloring, and somewhere in the years of his marriage, he had slowly replaced the instinct that had once made him kind with a practiced neutrality that he appeared to believe was the same thing. Mom, he kissed her cheek. You made the pies. I always make the pies. Right. He said this the way people say right when they mean I wish that were not true right now. He moved to the coffee maker and poured himself a cup and leaned against the far counter and talked to Courtney about something Eleanor wasn't listening to because she was watching him and thinking about something she had not allowed herself to think directly until that moment. He knew. He had known Brianna was bringing in catering this year. He had known, and he had not told Eleanor, not because he had forgotten, but because telling her would have required him to either manage Brianna's expectations or manage his mother's feelings. And he had decided, without quite deciding it consciously, that the easier of those 2 options was to do nothing and let the morning take care of itself. Eleanor crimped the edge of her second pie shell with her thumb and forefinger, the way her own mother had taught her, and said nothing. Snessen noted this in the ledger. There are families in which the grandmother is consulted about nothing and included in everything. They save her the seat she likes. They ask about the recipe before they change it. They don't move her husband's chair from the corner without asking. They understand that the woman who built the table should not be made to feel like a guest at it. Eleanor Whitmore's family was not that kind of family. It had not always been this way. There had been a time when Thomas was her ally at every gathering, the one who made sure she had a glass of wine and a chair that wasn't drafty, the one who pulled her into the conversation when Brianna talked over her, the one who had, in one early argument with Brianna that Eleanor had not been meant to hear, said, "That is my mother's recipe, and we are keeping it." She had loved him fiercely for that. She had held that moment like a coin. But coins spent down, and the thing about gradual erosion is that it does not announce itself. Every small capitulation Thomas made to the daily comfort of his marriage created the next one, and the one after that, until the man who had once said, "That is my mother's recipe," became the man who stood at the coffee maker on Thanksgiving morning, pretending not to see what was happening to her in his own kitchen. Eleanor thought about Harold. She did this often, still. Not the soft, gauze-covered remembering of grief, but the sharp, particular memory of specific conversations, specific sentences, specific expressions on his face that she had now been appointed to keep alive, because there was no one left to keep them with her. Harold would have seen it. He had always seen it faster than she did, and she had always seen it faster than everyone else, which meant Harold had been watching Brianna with clear eyes since approximately the second dinner, and had never once said directly what he saw. He had not been a confrontational man. He had been strategic. "You'll know when it's time," he had said to her once, in the context of something entirely different, a business decision she had been second-guessing. "The information is never complete until it is. You'll know." She had known then. She knew now. She was not there yet, but she could see it from where she stood. The moment arrived just before 10 o'clock, with Brianna's full family present, and Thomas standing at the island, and 8-year-old Maya sitting at the kitchen table drawing in a notebook, her dark braids falling over her shoulders, occasionally looking up at her grandmother with the open watchfulness of a child who understood nothing and felt everything. Eleanor had finished the first pie and was measuring filling for the second. She was, by any reasonable measure, occupying approximately 3 square feet of a large, well-designed kitchen. She was not in anyone's way. She was not speaking to anyone. She was making a pecan pie the way she had made it for 41 years, in the home of her son, on Thanksgiving morning. Brianna turned from the island. She looked at Eleanor's corner. She looked at the pie shells, the filling bowl, the apron, the calm, unhurried movements of a woman who did not consider herself to be anywhere she didn't belong, and something tipped over in Brianna. Eleanor would think about it later, would think about what exactly had tipped and what it revealed about the person Brianna was, underneath the organization and the catering aprons and the bright, practiced smile. She would conclude, in the way she concluded most things, that what tipped was not frustration or even genuine irritation. What tipped was something more basic, the particular fury of a person who has been slowly claiming a space and finds that the space still, somehow, recognizably belongs to someone else. "Eleanor," her voice had changed, not loud yet, tight. "I told you. We have catering. And you have lovely catering," Eleanor said pleasantly, without looking up from her crimping. "I'm just finishing the pies." "We don't need the pies." "The pies are for Maya." Maya looked up. Eleanor did not look at her, but something small and true passed between them, the way things pass between people who understand each other in a language that has no words. Brianna set down the container she was holding. "I need this counter space." "I'm at the side counter. I'm not in your way." "You're—" Brianna stopped, then started again with the particular cadence of a woman who has crossed the room past patience into something else entirely. "You are always in the way. You come in here every year like this is still your house, like you have some kind of… Brianna, Thomas's voice, low, warning. Ah, but not. Eleanor noted this with absolute precision, not stopping her, warning her to be quieter, to lower the temperature, not to stop. Brianna did not lower the temperature. She stepped closer to Eleanor's corner. She was taller than Eleanor by 5 inches and was wearing shoes with a slight heel, and she used all of it in that moment, the way people who have been waiting to use something finally stop waiting. Get out of my kitchen. The room went still. Eleanor heard it. She understood it. She did not move immediately because she was not a woman who moved from shock. She was a woman who moved from decision, and the decision required a single moment to fully form. She looked at her son. Thomas had his coffee cup in his hand and his eyes on the middle distance. See, that particular non-place that people look when they have chosen to be absent from a moment they are physically inside. He was right there. He had heard every word. He heard the silence that followed. He said nothing. He did not look at Brianna. He did not look at Eleanor. He looked at the cabinet above the coffee maker, as if it held the answer to a question only he could hear. Courtney made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, but lived in the same neighborhood. Dana looked at her phone. Linda looked at the floor. Maya looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor looked back at her granddaughter for exactly 1 second, long enough to see the 8-year-old's eyes fill with a helpless, bewildered hurt that was the worst thing in the room by a considerable distance. And then Eleanor looked away, because if she kept looking at Maya, she would not be able to do what she needed to do next, which was nothing. Nothing loud, nothing visible, nothing that gave this moment more size than it deserved to have in front of an audience that had not earned the right to watch her. Eleanor untied her apron. She folded it with the careful, practiced motions of a woman putting away something she values. She set it on the side counter next to her pie shells. She picked up her canvas bag. "Of course," she said. Her voice was level. Her face was composed. She was, to the room, a woman accepting a correction with dignity. She was not. She was a woman who had just made a decision so complete and so quiet that none of the people in that kitchen would understand what had happened until weeks later, when the shape of it arrived in their lives, without warning and without mercy. She walked to the hallway powder room. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the small upholstered bench Harold had placed there years ago, because Eleanor had once said every bathroom needed somewhere to sit, and Harold had put a bench in every bathroom of every house they had ever owned. She took her phone from her pocket. She found the name she was looking for. She had not called it in some months, not since the reading of Harold's will, not since the filing of the estate documents, not since the afternoon she had sat in Richard Elias's law office and listened to the full accounting of everything Harold had built and everything she now held and had thought. I am going to need to understand all of this, because I am the only one left to understand it. She pressed call. 1 ring, 2. Eleanor, Richard Elias answered on the 3rd ring with the particular warmth he reserved for clients he genuinely respected, which was not, Eleanor had always understood, a universal posture. Happy Thanksgiving. Is everything all right? Happy Thanksgiving, Richard. She kept her voice even. I'm sorry to call on a holiday. I'll be brief. Of course. What do you need? Eleanor was quiet for exactly 1 breath. Through the powder room door, she could hear the kitchen resuming, Brianna's voice giving instructions, music restarting, the domestic machinery of a holiday clattering back into motion as if she had never been there. She thought of Harold. She thought of 41 years. She thought of Maya's eyes. I'd like to review the Calloway Street lease, she said, when it comes up for renewal, and I'd like to talk about the promissory note on Thomas's property, and a few other things. A pause on Richard's end. Not the pause of surprise. Richard Elias did not surprise easily. The pause of a man recalibrating. I can make time Monday morning, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, Eleanor confirmed. Are you well? She looked at her reflection in the small mirror above the powder room sink. Silver hair, good posture, brown eyes that had laughed enough to build something permanent around them. "I am," she said. "Thank you for asking." She ended the call. She sat for another moment on Harold's bench in Harold's house, where her son had stood at a counter and watched in silence while someone told her to leave a room. Then she stood up, smoothed her slacks, unlocked the door, and walked back down the hallway. She retrieved her canvas bag and her cooler from the side counter. She took her apron, folded it, and placed it inside the bag. She left the pie shells, unbaked, sealed, ready, on the counter, because the pies were for Maya, and she was not petty enough to take them. She found Maya still at the kitchen table with her notebook, small and watchful, pencil held still. Eleanor stopped beside her. She bent down slightly and spoke only to her granddaughter, in a voice too low for the room to hear. "Grammy's going to head home, sweetheart. I left the pie shells for you. Tell your daddy to bake them at 350 for 45 minutes. The filling's in the container by the stove." Maya looked up at her with those serious dark eyes. "Why are you leaving, Grammy?" "Because sometimes the best thing a person can do is give people room to be exactly who they are." She smoothed one of Maya's braids gently back. "I'll see you soon, okay?" Maya caught Eleanor's hand before she could straighten up, held it for just a moment with both of her small ones, said nothing. Eleanor held on for a moment too. Then she straightened, picked up her bag, said a pleasant goodbye to the room in the general sense, "Have a lovely Thanksgiving, everyone," and left. She drove home the long way. So not because she needed the time to compose herself. Eleanor had been composed for 14 months, composed through the funeral and the will reading and the first holidays alone, and the 100 small moments in which her role in the family had contracted without announcement until it fit into something that could be moved aside without asking. She had been composed for a long time. Composure was not the same as absence. She drove the long way because she wanted to see the town. It was just past 10 in the morning on Thanksgiving, and the town was doing what small towns do on holidays. The bakery had a handwritten closed sign, but its lights were still on. A family walked a dog along the sidewalk in their good coats. A man in a driveway across from the park waved to a neighbor with the generous ease of people who have nowhere pressing to be. The low November light was doing what low November light does when you are paying attention to it, making everything look simultaneously temporary and permanent, the way good light always does. Eleanor drove past the corner of Callaway and Main without meaning to. There it was, Harold's building, a 2-story commercial brick building with wide parking, a loading dock on the side, and a painted sign she could see from the street. Harvest Table Events, Commissary Kitchen and Event Prep, Suite B, Brianna's Kitchen. Below market lease, extended by Harold as a favor to Thomas, because Thomas had asked, and Harold had been the kind of man who said yes to his son, even when he wasn't entirely sure he should. $3,000 a month for a commercial kitchen space that would rent for $4,800 anywhere in the county. Eleanor knew this, because Eleanor knew every number connected to every property Harold had ever owned. She had always known. She had simply not had occasion, until now, to think about what it meant that she knew. She drove past without stopping. She went home. She made herself a cup of tea, the good kind, the loose-leaf Earl Grey that Harold had ordered from a shop in London that shipped to them once a year, and that Brianna had once, visiting the kitchen, picked up and set back down, and said, "What is that smell? It's like someone dried flowers in a gym bag." Eleanor drank it at the small kitchen table by the window, the table that had been hers alone for 14 months, looking out at the garden where the tulips were sleeping under the first frost of the season. She sat for a long time. She was not angry, exactly. Or rather, she was angry in the way that deep, old, banked things are angry. Quietly, thoroughly, without waste. She was the kind of angry that does not need to be loud because it is not going anywhere. She thought about what Richard Elias would tell her on Monday. She already knew what he would tell her. She had sat across from him for hours over the course of the estate process, and she had asked every question there was to ask, and she understood exactly what she held, and exactly what it meant, and exactly what it was connected to. She had simply not had occasion to use it. The information is never complete until it is. You'll know. She had known. She finished her tea, she washed the cup, and she went to her study, Harold's old study, which she had quietly claimed as her own in the months after he died, not as an act of possession, but as an act of love, because she wanted to sit in the room where he had thought. And she took out her notebook. It was a simple thing, a green cloth cover, 100 ruled pages. She had started keeping it 2 years ago, around the time she had noticed the gradual erosion beginning in earnest. Not a diary. Eleanor was not a diary person. A record. Dates, events, amounts. The $80,000 down payment. The months the kitchen lease had run. The times she had been asked to leave a room by implication. The times Thomas had said nothing. She found a clean line and wrote the date. Then she wrote 4 words. Thanksgiving, kitchen, the call. She capped her pen. Nay, she set the notebook on the corner of the desk where Harold had always kept his. She looked out the study window at the bare November trees. She had been quiet for a long time. She had a meeting on Monday, and a daughter-in-law who had just, without knowing it, handed her the occasion she had been waiting for. Richard Elias had been an estate and property attorney for 31 years, and in that time he had developed a reliable instinct for the difference between a client who came to his office in distress and a client who came to his office in motion. Distressed clients arrived with tissue in their purses and questions that circled back on themselves, and a general quality of not yet knowing what they wanted. They needed managing as much as they needed advising, and Richard was good at that too. Patient, careful, willing to slow down. Clients in motion were different. They arrived early. They had their documents already organized. They had written their questions down in advance, and they asked them in sequence, and they listened to the answers with the focused attention of people who intend to do something with information rather than simply hold it. They did not cry in his office, not because they felt nothing, but because they had already decided that feeling and doing were going to happen in separate rooms. Eleanor Whitmore arrived at 8:52 on the Monday after Thanksgiving. She had her green notebook. She had the summary documents from Harold's estate. She had a list of 4 questions written in her clear, precise handwriting, and she placed that list on the corner of Richard's desk before she sat down, the way Harold used to place agendas at the start of a meeting, signaling without preamble that they were here to work. Richard sat across from her and looked at the list, and then looked at Eleanor and thought, "Here we go. You want to start with the Calloway Street property," he said. "I do." He opened the file. The Calloway Street building had come to Eleanor as part of Harold's estate, not because Harold had transferred it in anticipation of death, but because it had always been in both their names, the way their best properties always were, because Harold had been a man who believed that a business built by 2 people should be owned by 2 people, even when one of them had stepped back from the daily operation of it. Harold had been old-fashioned in the warmest possible sense of that word. He had not needed to be the sole name on things. He had needed the things to be right. The Calloway Street building was currently generating 4 leases: a small accounting firm on the ground floor east, a physical therapy practice on the ground floor west, a graphic design studio on the 2nd floor, and Harvest Table Events, Suite B, 2nd floor, at $3,000 per month on a lease that Harold had written personally, that had been renewed twice, and that was coming up for its 3rd renewal in February. "Walk me through the current rate," Eleanor said. Richard told her. $3,000 a month. Below market. Harold had said it that way as an accommodation. And current market rate for that space? Richard pulled up the comp analysis his office had run as part of the annual property review. Stark commercial kitchen and event prep space in that corridor of the county was running between $4,800 and $5,200 a month for comparable square footage. So the accommodation is approximately $18,000 to $24,000 a year, Eleanor said. Correct? Over the course of the lease, including both prior renewals, how much has that accommodation represented in total? Richard calculated. He told her. Eleanor wrote a number in her notebook. She looked at it for a moment, with the expression of someone confirming something they had already suspected. "What are the terms of the renewal?" she asked. "Does the tenant have any right of first refusal? Any fixed rate clause?" Richard checked the lease documents. "No right of first refusal, no fixed rate clause. The rate is renegotiable at each renewal at the landlord's discretion." Eleanor nodded slowly, made another note. "And the promissory note on Thomas's property." This one Richard knew without pulling the file, because it was the kind of document that stays present in a lawyer's mind not for its complexity, but for its unusual quality. Harold had structured the down payment assistance to Thomas and Brianna not as a gift, but as a promissory note, technically a loan, with interest set at a below-prime rate and repayment terms deliberately relaxed. Harold had done this, he had explained to Richard at the time, not because he expected Thomas to pay it back in any meaningful sense, but because he believed that people treated gifts differently than they treated obligations. He had wanted Thomas to understand that the $80,000 had come from somewhere real, from effort and time, and decades of work, and that understanding it as something owed, even softly, even on generous terms, would keep it from being invisible. It had not entirely worked, but Harold had tried. The note had a current outstanding balance of $71,000. It had been accruing at the agreed rate. Thomas had made 2 payments in the first year, and nothing since. Harold, in his final year, had not pressed it. The note now resided with Eleanor as part of the estate. "Is it callable?" Eleanor asked. Richard had been waiting for this question. "It contains a standard demand clause, yes." "Eleanor, I want to make sure you understand." "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm not asking you whether I should. I'm asking you what my options are." "Your options," Richard said carefully, "include demand for full repayment on 30 days' notice, renegotiation of terms, conversion to a formal lien against the property, or continued forbearance. The note is entirely within your discretion," Eleanor wrote in her notebook. He watched her write and thought about Harold, who had sat in that same chair and had the same quality of stillness, the kind of stillness that isn't passive, but is instead very full. "And the other properties," Eleanor said, moving down her list. They spent another 90 minutes going through it. The full estate picture assembled itself on the conference table between them in organized sections: the Callaway Street building, the promissory note, a commercial property 2 counties over that Harold had owned outright, a portfolio of investments that Eleanor had been managing conservatively since the estate settled, the pension from Harold's former company, her own retirement accounts from the years before Maya was born, when Eleanor had run the business side of Harold's first development firm, and had known exactly what she was worth in a professional sense, and had been paid accordingly. The picture, in its totality, was not what Brianna imagined. Brianna imagined a comfortable widow living on Harold's pension and a modest estate. She imagined someone to be managed. She imagined that the down payment had been a gift, formless and irrecoverable, and that the building on Callaway Street was simply a fact of life that would continue on its own, comfortable terms, indefinitely, because that was how things had always been. She did not know about the investment accounts. She did not know the full balance of the estate. She did not know that the note was callable. She had never, not once, asked Eleanor a direct question about money, because in Brianna's mental architecture, Eleanor was the kind of woman you were patient with, not the kind of woman you consulted. This was the error that Eleanor had been watching accumulate for 4 years. It was, she now decided, sufficiently accumulated. "One more thing," Eleanor said, when they had covered everything on her list. Richard waited. "The building on Callaway Street. Harold's will left it to me outright. Is there any ambiguity about that?" "None." "And the lease renewal in February. If I choose not to renew on current terms, now what is the tenant's obligation?" 30 days' notice. If you elect not to renew, the tenant vacates in 30 days from the end of the lease term. Eleanor looked at the window. The November street outside was bare and clear and honest, the way things are after the leaves are gone and you can see the actual shape of the trees. "I'm not going to make any decisions today," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm gathering information. I want to understand what I hold completely before I decide what to do with it." Richard nodded. He had seen this before, the careful, deliberate gathering of a person who was going to be very precise when the time came. "Is there anything you want me to do in the meantime?" he asked. Eleanor thought for a moment. "Make sure my records are entirely in order, all of it. I want a complete picture document. Properties, notes, accounts, everything, that I can look at as a single document. I can have that for you by end of week." "Thank you, Richard." She gathered her notebook and her documents and capped her pen. "And thank you for taking my call on Thanksgiving." "Of course." He paused. "Eleanor, is everything all right? With the family?" She looked at him with those brown eyes and their architectural lines and the expression that was not quite a smile, but lived near one. "The family," she said, "is exactly who they are." She left. She did not speak to Thomas for 11 days. This was not a dramatic gesture. She did not screen his calls. She was simply busy, we in the particular way of a woman who has decided to understand her own life in full before she adjusts any part of it, which requires a substantial amount of quiet work that the people waiting for her attention will always misread as withdrawal. Thomas called twice in the first week. Left voicemails. "Just checking in, Mom. Hope you're doing okay. Call me when you get a chance." The voicemails had the particular quality of calls made by people who are not entirely sure what they're calling about. They circled nothing, said nothing specific, asked no real question. They were, Eleanor understood, calls made by someone who was aware that a thing had happened and was not entirely sure whether the thing had been seen. He knew she had left Thanksgiving early. He did not know what she had done before leaving, and he did not know what she had done in the days since. He was in the way of people who have taken the easy road too many times, waiting to discover whether the road would continue to be easy. Eleanor returned his call on the 10th day, on a Tuesday evening, when she had what she needed and had decided how she wanted the next few weeks to proceed. "Mom." "Hey." Relief in his voice. Genuine, she thought. Whatever Thomas had become in the years of his marriage, he was not entirely without conscience. He had simply gotten very good at ignoring it when convenience required. "Hello, sweetheart." She was warm. Naturally, easily warm, the way she always was, because the warmth was real. The warmth and the decision coexisting without contradiction, the way things coexist in people who are complicated enough to hold more than one truth at a time. "I've been a little worried. You left kind of suddenly on Thanksgiving." "I did. I wasn't needed in the kitchen, and I thought it was better to give everyone space." A pause. Then, carefully, "Brianna felt bad about how that went." Eleanor waited. "She was just stressed. The catering coordination, and her family, and you know how she gets." "I do," Eleanor said. "She wanted me to tell you that." "That's kind of her." Beat. "How's Maya?" The shift worked the way it always did, not because Eleanor was trying to avoid the subject, but because Maya was the subject she actually cared about most, and Thomas knew that, and reaching for Maya was like touching something true in the conversation after a stretch of something careful and rehearsed. "She's good. She asked about you twice this week." "I'll take her to the Botanical Gardens Saturday if the weather holds. She wanted to see the winter exhibit." "She'd love that." "Good." Eleanor let a small pause settle comfortably. Then, "Thomas, I want to talk to you about some things related to your father's estate. Nothing urgent, but there are some decisions coming up in the new year, and I'd like you to understand them. Can we have lunch? Just the two of us." "Of course." "Yeah, absolutely." "When?" "Next week." "Wednesday?" "Wednesday works. Mom, are you okay? Is everything—" Everything is fine, she said. I'm taking care of what needs taking care of. That's all. She said goodbye and set the phone on Harold's desk. She was not, she recognized, being dishonest. She was taking care of what needed taking care of. The lunch with Thomas was real. She did intend to talk to him about the estate. What she did not tell him was that the conversation she planned to have was more educational than administrative, designed less to update him and more to begin the process of making sure that when certain things changed, Thomas would not be able to say he had not been warned. Eleanor believed in warnings. She had always believed in giving people the information they needed to make better choices, and in allowing the consequences that followed when they didn't. She believed in this even when, especially when, the person who needed warning was her son. In the meantime, she called Franklin. Franklin Webb had been Harold's contractor for 20 years. He was 62, broad-shouldered, methodical, yin with a handshake that Eleanor had always trusted, and a professional loyalty to the Whitmore family that had survived Harold's death intact, because Franklin was the kind of man who understood that the relationship had always been with both of them. Mrs. Whitmore. He was pleased to hear from her. How are you holding up? Very well, Franklin, thank you. I need a commercial property assessment. Callaway Street. Full inspection, market condition report, renovation potential if any. A beat. Suite B included? All suites. I can have my team there by Thursday. Good, and Franklin, let's keep this between us for now. It's an annual review, nothing more. Of course. He knew better than to ask more than he was told. That was another thing Eleanor had always trusted about him. She also called Margaret in the leasing office, not to give notice, not yet, but to confirm the lease terms and the February renewal date, and to make sure that the tenant notification letter, when it arrived, would have no procedural ambiguity. Margaret confirmed. Eleanor thanked her, filed the call in the green notebook. Then she called Caroline Marsh. Caroline was 73 and had been Eleanor's closest friend for 30 years, and the only person on earth who knew, in anything close to its full shape, what Eleanor's life actually looked like as opposed to what it appeared to be from the outside. They had met on a neighborhood committee when their children were young and had discovered in each other the thing that is harder to find than love, which is a friendship where neither person has to perform. She told you to get out of your kitchen, Carolyn said, after Eleanor described Thanksgiving with the concision she applied to most things. In front of Thomas, yes. And Thomas. Said nothing. The silence on Caroline's end was the particular silence of a woman who has been hearing installments of a story for 2 years and has just received the chapter that clarifies everything prior. Ellie. Only Caroline called her this. What are you going to do? I'm going to be very quiet for a little while longer, Eleanor said, and then I'm going to be very clear. That woman has no idea what she's sitting on top of. No, Eleanor agreed. She doesn't. Harold built half that woman's business kitchen. He did. And she told you to. She did. Another silence. Then Caroline, who had known Eleanor for 30 years and knew better than to offer advice she hadn't been asked for, said simply, Do you need anything from me right now? Not right now, but I'll need a witness at some point, someone who knows the timeline. I have been keeping notes, as a matter of fact, Caroline said, with the dry satisfaction of a woman who had expected to be useful eventually. Eleanor smiled for the first time since Thanksgiving. A real one. Small, but real. Of course you have, she said. Of course you have. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Margaret Reed. Why, the best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. Maya came to the botanical garden on Saturday. Thomas dropped her off because Brianna had a client event, a fact delivered via Thomas's text with the quality of an explanation that is also, slightly, an apology for an explanation that has become too familiar. Eleanor had long since stopped registering Brianna's client events as anything other than what they were. The acceptable reason, the one that fit neatly into the story Brianna preferred to tell about herself, which was the story of a woman too busy and important to extend courtesy to anyone she had already categorized as beneath her. Maya arrived at Eleanor's door in her winter coat, with her notebook under her arm. She was always carrying a notebook, this child, always writing or drawing or observing something in that focused, self-contained way that reminded Eleanor so much of Harold that it sometimes made her catch her breath. "Grammy!" She hugged Eleanor with the uncomplicated force of children who have not yet learned to manage their affection. Eleanor held on for a moment longer than strictly necessary. The Botanical Gardens winter exhibit was a thing of considered beauty. White lights threaded through bare branches, the tropical greenhouse lit with low amber warmth, an installation of glass sculptures in the shapes of birds that caught the December light and scattered it. Maya moved through it with the notebook open, stopping to draw the glass birds, the light patterns, the shapes of the bare oaks against the winter sky. Eleanor walked beside her, unhurried, and let the child set the pace. It was in the greenhouse, warm and humid, and smelling of earth and green things, that Maya looked up from her notebook and said what she had apparently been holding since Thanksgiving. "Why did Mommy yell at you?" Eleanor had been expecting this. She had not been expecting it to be this direct. Maya was 8, but she had always been 8 in the way of a person who has been watching adults carefully for longer than 8 years. "Your mom was stressed," Eleanor said, because it was true, among other things. Maya considered this. "She yells when she's stressed a lot." Daddy doesn't say anything when she yells." Eleanor looked at her granddaughter. The girl was watching a hummingbird that had appeared from somewhere in the greenhouse canopy, hovering near a red flower, with the particular focused intensity of something very small, doing something very important. "Sometimes adults need time to figure out how to handle things," Eleanor said carefully. "Even daddies." "You didn't yell back." "No? Why not?" Eleanor thought about this seriously, the way she thought about questions Maya asked, because Maya's questions deserved serious thought. "Because yelling would have made a lot of noise," she said finally, "and I needed to think. And you can't think well when you're making noise." Maya appeared to find this satisfactory. She went back to her notebook, drew the hummingbird in 3 quick strokes: trunk, wings, the needle of its beak, with the uncanny economy of a child who sees shape before she sees detail. "Are you still sad, Grammy? About your grandfather?" "About everything." Eleanor put her arm around Maya's shoulders. "I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm working on some things." "Good things or hard things?" "Both," Eleanor said. "Usually they're the same thing." Maya leaned into her for a moment. Small, warm, solid. Eleanor felt the weight of her and thought about what it meant that this child was the best thing connected to a situation that had become very complicated, and how that was almost always the case. The best thing tethered to the complicated thing, which is one of the reasons you have to handle complicated things carefully. "I saved the pie for you," Maya said. "I told Daddy to bake it like you said, and I put it in the back of the refrigerator so Aunt Courtney wouldn't eat it." Eleanor pressed her lips together. "Did it taste right?" "It tasted like Thanksgiving," Maya said. "The real kind." Eleanor held onto her granddaughter in the warm, humming center of the greenhouse and did not say anything for a moment because there was nothing to say that would improve on what Maya had just given her. The lunch with Thomas was on a Wednesday at a restaurant Eleanor chose. Not one near their house, not one near Brianna's commissary kitchen, not one Thomas would have chosen because it was too quiet and too good for someone on a Tuesday budget. A place Eleanor went when she wanted a serious conversation in a room that would hold it. Thomas arrived on time. He looked, high she thought, like a man who had been living at a slight remove from himself for long enough that it had become structural. Not unhappy exactly, not cruel, just somewhat absent from his own life, the way people get when they have outsourced too many decisions to someone else's comfort. He ordered the soup and the chicken. Eleanor ordered the fish. They talked for a few minutes about Maya, about the botanical garden, about a trip Thomas was thinking of planning in the spring. Then Eleanor set down her fork. "I want to talk to you about the Calloway Street building," she said. Something in Thomas's face shifted. Not alarm, not yet, but attention. The particular attention of someone who has just heard a name they weren't expecting in this conversation. "The lease on Suite B is up for renewal in February," Eleanor said. Thomas nodded slowly. "So, okay. I'm reviewing the terms." "Reviewing the—" He stopped. "Mom, that's Brianna's kitchen." "It's a commercial kitchen space in a building that belongs to me," Eleanor said. "Your father set the lease at $3,000 a month as an accommodation to you both when you were starting the business. That was generous of him. The current market rate for that space is between $4,800 and $5,200. Thomas was very still. "I haven't made any decisions," Eleanor said. "I want you to understand that. I'm reviewing the terms, as I have every right to do." "Brianna," he started, "has built a successful business in that space. I'm aware. The accommodation made that easier, and I'm glad it did." She said this simply, without edge. "But it is an accommodation, Thomas. It has been an accommodation for 4 years. And accommodations require ongoing decision-making." He looked at her across the table with an expression she read with precision. Not anger, not yet. Confusion. The particular confusion of a person who has been treating something as a fixed feature of the landscape, discovering that it is attached to a person. "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying that I'm reviewing it," Eleanor said, "and that I wanted you to know, because I believe in transparency." She let that word sit. Transparency. The thing that had been so comprehensively absent from the past 2 years of his family's relationship with her, that its introduction into the room had a slightly strange quality, like a window being opened in a house that had been shut for a long time. "Is this about Thanksgiving?" Thomas asked. Eleanor looked at him. She had thought about how to answer this question before coming, knowing it would be asked. "Thanksgiving is part of a pattern, Thomas. It is not the cause of a decision. What I am doing right now is what I should have been doing all along, which is understanding what I hold and what responsibilities come with it. Brianna is going to—" He stopped himself. Eleanor waited. "I don't want to put you two in a—" "You are not putting us anywhere," Eleanor said, with the calm and precise kindness of a woman who is refusing, in real time, to carry a burden that belongs to someone else. "The building is mine. The decisions about the building are mine. You have no obligation here except to listen, which I appreciate you doing." He was quiet for a long moment. "Mom," he said finally, "on Thanksgiving." She waited. "I should have said something." He said it to his plate, not to her face. "When Brianna, I should have said something." "Yes," Eleanor said, simply, without elaboration. Not cruelly, but without mercy either. "Yes. You should have." He nodded. Didn't offer an excuse, which surprised her slightly, and she was glad to be surprised. "I'm sorry." "I know," she said. They finished lunch. Eleanor paid. She had always paid when she chose the restaurant, and she chose the restaurant when she needed the conversation to be on her ground, in her frame, moving at her pace. She drove home thinking about Thomas, about the apology, which was real, about the absence of explanation, which was either growth or calculation, and she was not yet certain which, about the way he had said Brianna is going to, and stopped himself, odd and what he had stopped himself from finishing. She thought, he is not a bad man. He is a man who has spent 4 years choosing ease over honesty and has not yet understood what that has cost him. She thought, understanding is coming. The week before Christmas, Franklin Webb delivered his assessment of the Calloway Street property. They sat at Eleanor's kitchen table while Franklin walked her through it. The building was in excellent structural condition, Harold had always maintained his properties meticulously. The cosmetic elements of Suite B had been substantially modified by the tenant, who had installed commercial-grade equipment and storage systems, much of which was portable and therefore tenant property, but some of which, particularly the ventilation upgrades and the electrical panel expansion, had been done without the landlord approval required by the lease agreement. Eleanor read this section twice. The ventilation and electrical modifications, she said. Done without approval. Franklin nodded. I'd estimate the work at around $12,000. Good work, actually, but not documented through proper channels. Technically a lease violation. Eleanor noted this in the green notebook, with the careful specificity that made the green notebook what it was. Not a record of feelings, but a record of facts, precise and usable. And the renovation potential? She asked. Franklin leaned forward. If you cleared the current setup and refinished the space, you'd be looking at either a higher-tier commercial kitchen at the market rate, or, and this is interesting, he turned to a page in his report. If you reconfigured the suite layout, you could separate Suite B into two smaller units. Smaller footprint commercial spaces are actually in very high demand in this corridor. You could potentially generate more total rent from two smaller tenants than from one large one. Eleanor sat with this information for a long moment. She was not greedy. She had never been greedy. What she was precise. And there is a difference between greed, which takes without consideration, and precision, which understands exactly what something is worth and declines to pretend otherwise. She thanked Franklin. She set the report in the file she had started in Harold's desk drawer. She made dinner, something simple, soup and bread, and ate at the kitchen table by the window and watched the December dark come in over the garden. She thought about Brianna, about the commissary kitchen with its professional equipment and its catering operation that had grown, she knew from Thomas's occasional mentions, into something genuinely substantial. Events, corporate contracts, a staff of 6, built in part on a below-market lease in Eleanor's building, sustained by the ongoing invisible subsidy of Harold's accommodation. She thought about Thanksgiving morning, about the apron, about the counter, about the particular quality of "get out of my kitchen" said by a woman standing in a room she had not built, in a building she did not own, to the woman who held the deed. She thought about Maya's small hands holding hers in the greenhouse, about the real kind. She thought about Harold at his desk, writing an index card recipe, about the burned pie, about midnight and laughing. She had not decided everything. She was not, by disposition, a person who decided everything at once. But she had decided the direction. And the direction she was now clear on was forward, toward clarity, toward honesty, toward the kind of reckoning that does not announce itself as a reckoning until it has already arrived. In January, she thought, the lease renewal notice would need to go out. She would let Richard draft it. On the 23rd of December, Brianna called. Eleanor saw the name on her phone and felt nothing in particular. Not dread, not anticipation. The steady neutrality of someone who has done enough internal work that the incoming call is simply information, not weather. Eleanor, bright, warm, the version of Brianna that had a purpose. I wanted to call before the holidays. Thomas told me you'd been looking at the Callaway lease and I wanted to clear the air. Of course, Eleanor said. I know Thanksgiving was a small laugh, self-deprecating, practiced, chaotic. I get overwhelmed with the coordination. I hope you know I didn't mean anything by it. I appreciate you calling, Eleanor said pleasantly. I just think we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd love for us to start fresh in the new year. I was thinking maybe a dinner, the 4 of us. And Maya, obviously. Just family. Family, Eleanor noted the word. That sounds lovely, she said. Let's plan something after the new year. Perfect. And the lease. I'm sure it's all just routine, but if there's anything you need from me, documentation or whatever, I'm happy to. Richard handles all of that, Eleanor said. He'll be in touch. A brief pause. Richard? My attorney. He manages the property administration. I'll let him know you're amenable to communication. Oh, sure, of course. Something had shifted in Brianna's voice. Not alarm, but the first faint register of a landscape that had suddenly shown itself to be slightly different from the map she was carrying. Well, happy holidays, Eleanor. Happy holidays, Brianna. A beat. Tell Thomas to bring Maya on the 26th if he'd like. I'll make something. I'll let him know. They hung up. Eleanor sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. She called because Thomas told her. Thomas told her because he was worried. She is worried because she has never, until this moment, thought of the building as something that required her attention. She has thought of it the way people think of the air in a room, as simply present, as unconditional, as belonging to the category of things that are simply true. Eleanor set the phone down. In the green notebook, she wrote the date and a single line. Brianna called. First contact since Thanksgiving, mentioned the lease. She capped the pen. The first faint ripple had reached the shore. Brianna didn't know yet what had caused it. She would spend the next several weeks trying to locate it, looking toward Eleanor's manner, toward the lease renewal, toward Thomas's careful evasions when she pressed him for what exactly his mother had said at that lunch. She would not find the shape of it. Not yet. Not until February, when Richard Elias's letter arrived at the Harvest Table Events offices on Callaway Street, Suite B. Formal, precise, and carrying with it the news that the lease would be renewing at market rate. $4,800 per month, an increase of $1,800. Not cancellation, not eviction, an adjustment. The accommodation gently and irrevocably ending. Eleanor knew how Brianna would read that letter. As an attack, as a declaration, as the opening move in a war. It was not. It was simply accuracy. The beginning of things being called what they were, priced at what they cost, held by whom they belonged to. Eleanor Whitmore, Mome property owner, Callaway Street. She had always been that person. It had simply taken a kitchen and a Tuesday morning, and a woman who had never thought to look at the name on the deed to make Eleanor decide it was time to be that person out loud. The year turned. Eleanor spent New Year's Eve with Caroline, who made lamb chops and opened good wine, and didn't ask Eleanor what was coming next, because she already knew, and because the best friendship is the kind that knows when to be company and when to be witness, and when, simply, to pour another glass. They watched midnight arrive from Caroline's back porch, where there were string lights and 2 chairs and the cold clear dark of a January sky, with more stars visible than the town usually allowed. Ready? Caroline asked. Eleanor looked up at the stars. Harold had known their names. He used to point them out, not scientifically, informally, the way he knew most things, with enthusiasm and without pedantry, naming them the way you name old friends. She couldn't remember all of them now. She remembered Orion. She remembered the way Harold would find it every winter and say, "There he is," with the satisfaction of someone sighting a traveling companion. She found Orion. "There he is." "Yes," she said. She was. The letter went out on the 8th of January. Richard Elias drafted it on his firm's letterhead, which was cream-colored and embossed and carried the particular authority of language that has been chosen carefully by someone who knows what every word costs. It was 2 paragraphs. It stated that the lease for Suite B, Callaway Street Commercial Complex, would renew effective the 1st of March at a rate of $4,800 per month, representing an adjustment to current market conditions. It outlined the 30-day acceptance window. It provided Richard's contact information for any questions. It was signed by Eleanor Whitmore, property owner. It was, by any objective measure, a routine commercial lease renewal notice. Eleanor knew it would not be received as a routine commercial lease renewal notice. She knew this the way she knew most things, not from drama or prediction, but from having paid attention for a long time to the way Brianna organized the world. Brianna divided everything into 2 categories: things that confirmed her position, and things that threatened it. Routine things lived in the first category. A lease renewal notice from a landlord who had spent 4 years being in accommodation and had now, without warning or visible anger, become a landlord. That was the second category. That was something threatening, and things in the second category of Brianna's world produced a very specific response. They produced noise. The noise arrived on a Thursday. Eleanor was in the garden, January, but mild enough for the work she wanted to do: the slow turning of the beds, the clearing of the dead growth, the preparation of ground that would hold tulips again in spring. She had her gloves and her small trowel and the radio on in the kitchen, audible through the back door, and she was, for the first time in recent memory, simply present in an uncomplicated way. Her phone rang at 11:47. Thomas. She pulled off one glove and answered. "Mom!" His voice had the particular stretched quality of a man who has been in an argument and has not yet fully left it. "Brianna got the lease letter." "Good," Eleanor said. "Richard said it went out last week." "Mom." A pause that was attempting to be composed and not quite making it. 1,800 more a month. "The accommodation your father set was generous, Thomas. The building's costs haven't stood still." "I understand that, but she's saying this is—" She used the word punitive. Eleanor stripped off the second glove. She sat on the garden bench Harold had built from cedar the second summer they'd lived in this house, the bench that had survived 3 decades and 1 coat of new stain, and was still the most solid piece of outdoor furniture she had ever sat on. "Punitive," she said. "She thinks it's about Thanksgiving." "The lease renewal is a property management decision made in consultation with my attorney," Eleanor said. "It is at market rate. If Brianna believes market rate is punitive, that is a conversation for her to have with the market." A silence. Then, with the exhausted undertone of a man who has been caught in the middle for long enough that the middle is beginning to feel like its own kind of injury. "She wants to meet. She wants to talk to you directly." Eleanor considered this. She had expected it. She had thought about when it would come, and what shape it would take, and what she wanted from it. She had talked to Caroline about it over the phone last week. Not for advice, simply to think out loud with someone whose judgment she trusted completely. "I'll have dinner," she said. "Here? At our—" "No." Gently, simply. "Here. At my house. The 4 of us. Thomas, bring Maya." A pause. "Brianna is going to want to talk about the lease." "She's welcome to." "Mom." "Thomas." Her voice was quiet and completely firm, the way a good fence is firm, not aggressive, not apologetic, simply there. "You are welcome at my table, both of you. I will make dinner. We will talk. That is what I'm offering." He accepted because there was nothing else to accept. They agreed on the following Saturday. She hung up and put her gloves back on and returned to the garden beds and thought about what she would cook. She would make the roast chicken, the one with the lemon and the herbs from the garden pots, the one Harold had requested for every birthday dinner for 30 years. She would make the roasted root vegetables and the good bread she baked on Friday afternoons, and the soup she started Thursday night, so it would be deep and settled by Saturday. She would set the table with her anniversary china, the china that had been packed in newspaper and called too fragile, and replaced with square gray plates that looked like office furniture, now unpacked, washed, and returned to their rightful place in the cabinet. She would set 5 places: Thomas, Brianna, Eleanor, Maya, and 1 more. Because Caroline was coming, and Eleanor had decided she wanted a witness at this particular table. Not for legal reasons, for historical ones. There are moments in a life that need to be witnessed by someone who knows the whole story. Not so the moment can be reported later. So it can be held fully in real time by someone who understands what it means. Caroline knew what it meant. Saturday arrived with the particular quality of winter days that are cold without being brutal. Clear sky, low light, the bare trees making their honest shapes against the gray blue of mid-afternoon. Eleanor had been cooking since Thursday, and the house smelled like everything that had always meant warmth in it. The chicken was resting. The bread had come out perfectly. The soup was in the pot on low, and the table was set with the china and the embroidered cloth and the candles she had bought at the market, tall and cream-colored, the kind Harold had always said made a table look like it was ready for something important. It was ready for something important. Caroline arrived at 4:30 with a bottle of wine and the quiet composure of a woman who has been briefed. She helped Eleanor light the candles, and they sat for 15 minutes at the kitchen table. Eleanor's table, Eleanor's kitchen, with Eleanor's soup on the stove, and had a cup of tea and said almost nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said that hadn't already been said. Thomas arrived at 5:15. Maya came through the door first, the way children do, unfiltered and forward, and went directly to Eleanor, with the certainty of someone who has been thinking about this arrival for days. Grammy, she wrapped both arms around Eleanor's waist. It smells like real food. It is real food, Eleanor said. Go find the cookies I left on the side counter. Don't tell your mother. Maya went, already smiling. Thomas came next. He looked. Eleanor read him carefully, the way she had been reading him his whole life, tired but present. More present than he had been at Thanksgiving, than he had been at the lunch, than he had been in recent memory. He kissed her cheek and said hello to Caroline with a warmth that was genuine, and shook off his coat and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the table and the candles and the china, and did not say anything for a moment. Then, "You use the good dishes." "I always use the good dishes," Eleanor said, "when it's a good occasion." He looked at her. Something moved across his face that she did not quite have a name for. Acknowledgement, perhaps. The particular acknowledgement of someone who has understood, in a single image, how long the good dishes had been in the cabinet. Brianna came in last. She was composed, and the composition was visible, the way hers always was, a brightness calibrated for purpose, a smile that was doing structural work. She wore a dark green dress, and her hair was perfect, and she hugged Eleanor with the warmth of a woman who has decided that warmth is the correct strategy for this evening. "Eleanor," she held on a beat. "Thank you for having us." "Of course." Eleanor was warm in return, simply without performance. "Come in, meet Caroline. She's an old friend. We were on the neighborhood committee together years ago." Brianna shook Caroline's hand. Something in her registered the presence of an outside person at this table. Eleanor watched her register it and say nothing about it. Good, take note, file it. They moved to the living room while Eleanor finished the last of the dinner. And she could hear through the connecting door the conversation doing what conversations do when people are being careful. Surface and bright. Maya's clear voice cutting through periodically with the questions children ask that no one else will. Why is Caroline's ring so big? Daddy is the chicken, that chicken. Or a different chicken. Grammy, can we look at the garden, even though it's dark? Eleanor plated the chicken. She called them to the table. East they sat. Eleanor at the head. Thomas to her right, Maya next to him. Caroline to Eleanor's left. Brianna across from Maya, which placed her at the foot, not the foot of her table, but the foot of Eleanor's, in Eleanor's house. And Eleanor watched Brianna orient herself to this geography with the invisible recalibration of someone used to being at the center. Eleanor served. She served Brianna first, because that was how you treated a guest, and Brianna was, in this house, a guest. She served Thomas and Maya and Caroline and herself. She poured wine for the adults and juice for Maya. She put the bread in the center. Caroline told a story about a neighbor's cat and a bird feeder. Thomas laughed. Maya asked if the cat ate the bird. The table found its rhythm, the way tables do when the food is good and the host is steady. For 40 minutes, it was simply dinner. Eleanor had intended this. She had always believed that the worst conversations happened on empty stomachs and in rooms that hadn't been warmed up. She believed in the chemistry of a table that has been sat at long enough to feel familiar, where people have eaten and relaxed incrementally into something closer to themselves. She waited. Brianna was patient too, in her way. She complimented the chicken. She admired the china. She talked about a corporate event Harvest Table was preparing for in February. A large one, a good client. Eleanor listened with genuine attention because the business was real and Brianna had built it with real effort, and Eleanor had never once confused her problems with Brianna with an absence of respect for the actual work. Maya asked to be excused and went to find the cookies she already knew about, and in the small pause that followed, Brianna set down her fork. "I wanted to talk about the letter," she said. Eleanor nodded, folded her hands in her lap. "I was surprised," Brianna said. Her voice was carefully modulated. Not aggressive, measured. The voice of a woman who had prepared this, too. "We've been in that space for 4 years. Harold set the rate, and we've been reliable tenants. I thought we had a relationship that was stable." "You have been reliable tenants," Eleanor said. "I want to acknowledge that clearly." "Then why the increase?" "Because the rate was always an accommodation," Eleanor said. "Your father-in-law set it below market as a gift to help you start the business. He was generous. That generosity was real. But accommodations are decisions that belong to the person making them, and now that person is me." A small silence. Thomas was watching his hands. "The business is past the startup stage," Eleanor continued. "You have 6 employees and a corporate client portfolio. Harvest Table Events is a going concern. I'm proud of what you've built." She meant it. She said it the way she meant things, directly, without softener, without edge. "Which is why I believe it can sustain a market-rate lease." Brianna looked at her for a moment, then said carefully, "This feels like it's about more than the lease." "Most things are about more than the single thing," Eleanor said. "But I try to address one thing at a time." "Eleanor." Brianna put both hands on the table. A gesture Eleanor recognized. The gesture of someone preparing to speak plainly, which in Brianna's case was always slightly dangerous, because Brianna's version of plainness had a quality of entitlement embedded in it so deep she couldn't feel it anymore. I want to be honest with you. Please. I know Thanksgiving was. I know I was short with you. I've thought about it." Eleanor waited. "But I also think—" Brianna paused, chose. "I think you felt pushed out. And I understand that. I do. It's hard, with the shift in the family, after Harold. I understand you're adjusting. I just don't want the business to be the place where that adjustment lands." The table was very quiet. Eleanor heard what Brianna had just done. She had reframed the lease renewal, the promissory note, the building, the Thanksgiving kitchen, 2 years of accumulated small erasures, as Eleanor's emotional difficulty with grief. She had taken Eleanor's clarity and called it instability. She had dressed dispossession as compassion. She had done it kindly. She had done it with the fluency of someone who had been doing it for years. Eleanor looked at Thomas. Thomas was looking at Brianna, and the expression on his face was one Eleanor had not seen before, not on his adult face. It was the expression of a person watching something happen and finally seeing it for what it is, the way you finally see a magic trick once you know where to look. He said nothing, but he did not look away. "Brianna," Eleanor said, "I want to tell you something." Brianna met her eyes. "I am not adjusting. I am not confused. I am not struggling with grief in a way that affects my judgment." Eleanor said this with the even, precise calm of a woman who has said difficult, true things many times and has learned that the saying is easier when you are certain. "I am 70 years old, and I managed the financial side of Harold's business for 11 years, before you were part of this family. I understand leases and promissory notes and market rates the way I understand bread recipes. Not abstractly, from the inside." Brianna's expression had shifted. The warmth was still there, but something behind it had gone careful. "What Harold set in place was a gift," Eleanor continued. "Gifts are given by the giver. When the giver is gone, the gift returns to the decision of whoever holds it. That is not grief. That is property law. And it is also, she paused precisely, the natural result of treating someone as though they cannot see what is happening in their own life. The candles moved in some invisible current of air. Thomas said quietly, to no one in particular, Brianna. Brianna looked at him. She's right. 2 words, small. But in the architecture of 4 years of their family's particular silence, they were structural. They were the wall that had been holding something up, finally stepping aside. Brianna stared at her husband. She built that building, Thomas said. He was speaking slowly, with the effortful cadence of a man saying something he has been not saying for a long time. She and Dad built all of it. And we have been. He stopped, found the word, used it. We have been in that building for 4 years on her generosity, and we have not. I have not. He pressed his lips together. I should have said something, on Thanksgiving. I should have said something long before Thanksgiving. Brianna's composure was intact on the surface and fractured underneath, and visible to Eleanor, the way certain things are visible only to people who have been watching long enough. Thomas, you told my mother to get out of a kitchen that exists because of money my parents gave us. He said it without accusation, flatly, as a fact being named at last. And I didn't say anything, and she still. He looked at Eleanor. You still fed us tonight. You set the good table. Eleanor held his gaze. This was the son she had raised. Not gone, not replaced, delayed. Buried for a while under the comfortable weight of the easier choice. But here, tonight, at this table, eating this food, with Maya in the next room, and the good china out, and no more distance left to stand at. Here he was. She did not make a speech. She did not perform the reunion. She simply looked at him with the love that had always been there, unrevoked, waiting, and said, I know. Carolyn poured more wine. The dinner continued. It did not resolve everything in a single evening, because Eleanor had never believed that a single evening could resolve what 4 years had built. But things that had been unnamed for a long time were now named, and named things are different from unnamed things. They take up the right amount of space. They can be looked at directly. They can be addressed. Brianna did not crumble. She was not that kind of woman. She sat through the remainder of the dinner with the managed poise of someone reorganizing internally, recalculating, and Eleanor neither hurried her toward an emotion she wasn't feeling, nor granted her the exit of pretending nothing had shifted. When Maya came back to the table with cookie crumbs on her sweater and the uncomplicated happiness of a child who has eaten something good and hidden, Eleanor watched Brianna look at her daughter, and something cross her face that was, Eleanor thought, honest. Complicated and honest. The look of a woman who loves her child and is beginning to understand what she has been modeling for her. That look Eleanor filed not in the ledger of wrongs, but in the separate, smaller, more careful ledger she kept for things that might yet become something good. They left at 9. Maya hugged Eleanor at the door the way she always did. Long, complete, as though she were pressing something into the hug for safekeeping. Same Grammy, she said into Eleanor's shoulder. Same Grammy, Eleanor confirmed, where Thomas kissed her cheek and held on a moment. I'm going to be better, he said quietly, for only her to hear. I know you are, she said. I've always known you could be. Brianna said goodnight with the quietness of a woman who has more to say and is deciding how and when to say it. Eleanor accepted this. She was not in a hurry. The door closed. Caroline was already washing the wine glasses. Eleanor stood in her hallway in the silence that a house holds after people have left it. Not empty silence, full silence, the kind that comes when a place has been used for exactly what it was meant for, and everything is still vibrating slightly with it. She went to the kitchen. She helped Caroline with the dishes. They moved around each other the way old friends move in a kitchen, without instruction, without collision, each knowing which task to take. When the plates were clean and put away, the good plates, the anniversary china, back in the cabinet where they belonged, Caroline dried her hands and looked at Eleanor across the kitchen. "Well," she said. "Well," Eleanor said. "How do you feel?" Eleanor thought about it. She thought about Thanksgiving morning and the canvas bag and the apron folded on the side counter. She thought about Harold's bench in the powder room and the phone call made in one quiet breath. She thought about Richard's office and the green notebook and the comps for the kitchen space. She thought about Maya's hands in the greenhouse and the burned pie and the Orion star on New Year's Eve. "Clear," she said finally. "I feel clear." Caroline nodded once, the nod of someone who understands that this is the right answer, and also the hard-won one. "Harold would have loved tonight," she said. "He would have eaten 3 portions of the chicken and pretended he didn't. And he would have cried at Thomas. He would have absolutely cried at Thomas and denied it immediately." They laughed. Real laughter, the kind that lives at the exact intersection of love and loss and time, the kind that is only possible between people who have known each other long enough to laugh at what would otherwise only hurt. In February, Harvest Table Events signed the renewal at $4,800 a month. Brianna sent a brief email through Richard's office confirming acceptance of the terms. Richard called Eleanor to let her know. Eleanor thanked him. She wrote the date in the green notebook. She wrote, "Renewal signed. Market rate. Correct." She closed the notebook. She thought, "This is not victory. It was never about victory. It is about accuracy, about things being called what they are, held by whom they belong to, priced at what they cost. It is about an end to the long performance of smallness that no one had asked her to perform, but that she had gradually, over years of choosing peace over honesty, let herself slip into. It was done now. She was done with it. There is an epilogue to every story of this kind, and it is never the dramatic one people expect. The dramatic epilogue lives in the reveal, in the reckoning, in the night at the table when unnamed things finally get named. The real epilogue is quieter. See, it is the Tuesday morning, 3 months later, and the shape of the ordinary. Eleanor's Tuesdays had changed. She worked in the garden in the morning, when the light was still low and the air had that clean, early quality she had always loved. She had planted the tulip bulbs in November, and they were coming now. The first ones, red and cream, Harold's favorites. The colors he always said looked like something celebrating. She cut a few stems and put them in the blue vase on the kitchen table, and stood back and looked at them and thought, yes. Richard had arranged for the promissory note on Thomas's property to be restructured. Not called, restructured. Modest monthly payments, formal and documented. The kind of arrangement that acknowledges an obligation without destroying the person who holds it. Thomas had agreed without argument, which Eleanor took as its own kind of evidence. She had established a small education account for Maya, the kind of account that grows quietly over years and is available when the person it belongs to is old enough to use it for something that matters. She had told Thomas about it and asked him to mention it to Maya in the way you mention futures to 8-year-olds, gently, as possibility, as the thing that is already waiting. Maya had apparently responded by announcing she wanted to study either birds or architecture, and that she was not yet sure which. Eleanor had thought, either one is right. Both of them are Harold. She did not see Brianna often. This was not the result of a decision or a coldness. It was simply the natural result of 2 women operating in their correct capacities. Eleanor as the woman who owns the building, Brianna as the woman who leases the kitchen, Thomas as the man who is slowly learning to occupy his own life with more honesty than he had managed in recent years. The warmth between them was careful now, and careful warmth is not the same as absence. It is, Eleanor had come to understand, sometimes more durable. She had gone once to Calloway Street, not to inspect. She had Franklin for that, but simply to go. To stand in front of the building Harold had bought 20 years ago, and she had maintained, and Richard had properly administered, and which had, without fanfare, served its quiet purpose at exactly the right moment. It was a good building, well-maintained, full. The accounting firm and the physical therapy practice and the graphic design studio all going about their business in their respective suites. And in Suite B, the sounds of a working kitchen, equipment, movement, the low, organized noise of people producing something real. Eleanor stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She had not needed to come. She had come because Harold had loved this building specifically, had loved it the way he loved certain things, for their solidity and their usefulness, and the fact that they did their job without requiring constant attention. He had driven past it sometimes on Sunday afternoons, not to check on it, simply because he liked to see it standing. She understood that now, in a way, she hadn't entirely understood when he was alive. She understood it the way you understand most things, Harold. Slowly, fully, arriving at the understanding slightly after the moment it would have been most useful, and finding that it is still useful, that it has become the kind of understanding you carry. She drove home the long way. On a Saturday in April, she made the pecan pie. Not for a holiday, not for a gathering. For herself, because it was a Saturday, and the kitchen smelled good, and she had the filling and the shells, and the afternoon, and no reason in the world not to make the thing she had always made because she wanted to. She was crimping the edge of the second shell, thumb and forefinger, the way her mother had taught her, when her phone showed a text from Thomas. Maya wants to know if she can come over tomorrow and help with whatever you're baking. Eleanor looked at the text, then looked at the pie shell in her hands, then looked out the kitchen window at the garden, where the tulips were fully open now, red and cream, standing up straight in the April light, with the uncomplicated confidence of things that have been underground a long time and have finally come up. She typed back, "Tell her I'll save her the second pie. She can do the crimping." A reply in 30 seconds. She just yelled yes loud enough that the neighbors probably heard. Eleanor set her phone down. She finished the crimping. She slid both pies into the oven. She set the timer and tied her apron, the cream one with the blue stripes, the Vermont one, and stood at the kitchen window and watched the tulips move slightly in the April wind, the way things move when they are alive and rooted, and exactly where they are supposed to be. See, the kitchen smelled like butter and sugar, and the particular warmth of an oven doing its reliable work, and the afternoon light came in the way it always had in this kitchen, and Eleanor was at her stove in her house at her window, and the timer was set, and tomorrow her granddaughter was coming to crimp pie shells and learn the thing that mothers and grandmothers teach when they understand what is worth teaching. This room, this warmth, this standing at a window, watching something you planted come up in the spring. Harold, the bench. Orion in the winter sky. You'll know when it's time. She had known. She was here. There is a particular kind of woman the world learns to overlook. She is patient. She does not raise her voice. She is the one who remembers where everything is and how everything works, and who needs what before they know they need it. She has spent decades being the invisible engine of other people's comfort, and she has done it with love, real love, the kind that does not require an audience. What the world does not understand about this woman, what the people sitting at her table do not understand, what the people standing in her kitchen do not understand, is that her silence is not vacancy. It is capacity. It is the practiced, deliberate, deeply intelligent silence of someone who has decided to see who people truly are before she decides what to do about it, who has been keeping the ledger, who knows the name on the deed and the balance in the account and the terms of the note and the market rate for the space and the exact date the lease comes up for renewal, who made one call on a Tuesday morning, sitting on a cedar bench her husband built while someone was in the next room believing they had won. The women the world underestimates are not unaware of being underestimated. They are waiting. They are watching. They are deciding. And when they move precisely. This is the truth Eleanor Whitmore had known all along. From the first Thanksgiving, Brianna rearranged the table. From the first time Thomas said nothing. From the first moment she felt herself being slowly, casually made smaller in a life she had built. She had known. She had simply been deciding when. And thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated, and we tell those stories here.